Hello everyone, it's Mike Levin, April 21st, 2016, at around 8:50 a.m. on my way into work. Today I took the A so that I could be assured a seat in the morning, which lets me out at Penn Station here by Madison Square Garden, and it's a longer walk, probably close to 15 minutes on this end, because it's 33rd Street instead of 28th Street, and I think along the block further than the one lets me off right in the Flower and Warehouse District. So I thought I'd take this walk this morning. I was running a little bit early. I'll still just be getting there at probably like 9 o'clock sharp, but still, it's an enjoyable walk. Gives me more time for the video. Over the weekend, last weekend, I took Addie out to Times Square on the first truly beautiful spring day. And, you know, I did that primarily to take her to the Disney store. She wanted to see, maybe get some Disney princess. We got a little Rapunzel doll, and after that, as the antidote, I took her to Midtown Comics, where she got a Spider-Man and an Electro. So that was really exciting. But in waiting for getting through a really big crowd, they're doing some construction on 7th Avenue. We were in kind of a cattle chute, and one of the Times Square, you know, prophet naysayers was there talking about the end of the world and such. And Addie turned to me and said, "Is that true?" And I looked at her and I said, "Addie, there's, you know, about 7 billion people on this planet." And she first said to me, "More than that," because she knows it's between 7 and 8. And I said to her, "That's, you know, more than there are stars in the sky." Although we're here in New York, you can't really see those stars. She sees them when we get to the Catskills. But the point is, there's amazingly large numbers of people in this world, and everyone believes something different. And not everybody can believe the same things, and that's what that person believes. And she totally got it. Her, you know, eyes sort of opened wide with understanding, and I think that's gonna do her well. I wish people explained stuff like that to me when I was a kid. And you know, I guess it comes together with the, you know, the rereading of this Thomas Covenant, Lord Fowle's Bane book that I read first when I was 12 or 13. Certainly the series went into when I was 13 and 14. But I started reading it, or I first became aware of it when I was 12, going to overnight summer camp in the Poconos in an all-boys science camp called Camp Watonka. I think it was Camp Watonka, near Lake Wallenpaupack, the largest artificial, you know, man-made lake, human-made lake in the Poconos. So maybe even the state, I'm not exactly sure. It's a very large artificial lake, and I only stayed there for half the summer. I was signed up to be there for both halves, and when I expressed to my dad I didn't want to stay there, he was actually relieved, and I spent the second half of the summer riding my bike basically to the Plymouth Meeting Mall or McDonald's every day. And soon after that, that opened up the world to me as far as, you know, working. I worked at 14 years old as a cart boy at Super Fresh. I doubt the chain even exists anymore. And yeah, that book, it was my first epic novel, my first thick, you know, J.R. Tolkien type book, and I knew I needed to read The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Rings, but I've been hearing about this book from one of my Dungeons and Dragons, you know, game mates at camp, and when I read the back cover, I realized this is where he got his scenarios from, so I had to read it. And so began one of the most formative, I guess, things in my life, the reading of that book. Lots of stuff has came along afterwards to sort of be the anecdote to that, the antidote to that. anecdotes about the antidote. But it's an anti-hero series. It's about a really skeptical, cynical, unbelieving son of a bitch who got that way because he's a leper. He got leprosy. And it was at the time when it could be treated and kept under control if you were ungodly disciplined and meticulous in taking care of yourself, which of course happens, and in this case in a small town on our world, with everyone turning against you and ostracizing you, outcast. So he gets thrust into this other worldly fantasy lands where the health of the land is radiantly visible, and there's a Lord Foul the Despiser who is threatening to be a blight upon the land. It's a plight and a blight. Thomas Covenant is the reluctant hero roped into saving the world, and in the process he ends up raping someone as he regains his senses and he loses control of himself. He regains his nerves, because apparently one of the things leprosy does is it erodes and eats away your nerve endings, and then your immune system is really vulnerable to every little thing that sets in, and that's where you get the classic view of a crippled, deformed leper. And so he wasn't that. He was still, it still looked normal, started to regain his health, and that did a real mental job on him, because he is hyper intelligent. He himself is a successful author by this time in his life, and this hyper discipline and everyone ostracizing him, and his wife, who he seems to have loved dearly and had a kid with, suddenly just cutting him off, divorcing him, and disappearing. His white gold ring becomes his magical weapon in this fantasy land. So it's full of symbolism and metaphor that was mostly lost on me as a 12-year-old, but I knew it was there. I remember the moment that I realized that the land was a symbol for his body, and he was like a white blood cell, white gold, inside his own body, mentally healing himself through force of willpower. It was a huge revelation, and this whole series is basically Osmosis Jones meets The Hobbit. And it's a wonderful series when viewed in the correct light, but as a impressionable young 12-year-old, it was a real head job. But I loved it. I read 6 of what I think are the 9 or 11 books. I'm not sure. They're beyond what I read up to. But I read a bunch of them. And I decided to reread the first as my second rereading of my adult life of these big epic sci-fi fantasy things. The first being Isaac Asimov's Foundation, the writer who I felt that I should have found my way to during that summer of science camp and the summer before my bar mitzvah and my Israel trip the next year, where I did end up reading J.R. Tolkien while I was in Israel. And I definitely saw it as a beginning of the balancing of my reading diet. And it wasn't until a few years later that I found my way into true sci-fi through circuitous routes. It was probably Piers Anthony by that time, where I went from his silly wordplay Xanth series to his Space Pirate series. I forget exactly the name of it, but it was formative as well. And I was like, sci-fi, speculative history. And then when I read Foundation, like very speculative history, the science of knowing the future, and everything resonated so true. And I realized that writing, like so so many other things in life could be a practical tool. Whereas the fantasy stuff was useful for its rich metaphors. It was less structured and less, you know, practical and forward thinking than a lot of this sci-fi, particularly hard sci-fi, which really gives you insight as to where things are and where things might be going. Like Werner Vinge is probably one of the new, you know, preeminent giants, I guess right up there with Asimov, and I thought there weren't really that many of these, or that I had read them all, and then I encountered Ian Banks and realized, oh my god, it doesn't end. So that's where I am right now. I am re-immersing myself into all this reading activity via the wonderful Kindle, building my vocabulary, flashcards as I go, and that's it. Thought I'd say a few words about that, and I'll turn around and show the building. That was my first building here in New York. It's probably not visible. It's a beautiful scene there. Maybe I'll take a picture later, but the Flatiron Building. And since I moved to New York 10 years ago, I've been just jumping around to different places within a general radius of that Flatiron Building, and I'm a Midtown SEO employee. So that's a little about who I am and where my kooky thought processes come from that you see reflected in everything I do, my development work, my personal life, the way I'm choosing to raise my daughter, etc. So I hope you enjoyed that little spiel, and I hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.